Sarah from 17 once again. This is my Uncharted 4 Crushing Difficulty walkthrough. This is Chapter 1, The Lure of Adventure. As always, in pretty much every Uncharted game that I've played, the game begins with tutorializing. Like a lot of games do. And the particular tutorialization that this game opts for is once again is in medias res, where it starts in the middle of the game, gives you a little introduction to a bit of craziness that's on screen, and then we pull back and then we get the context for where we were. So at this very beginning part here, we are in boats. It is an incredibly strikingly beautiful section, and we're going to be slamming into smaller boats to get some one-hit kills, and then we're going to be getting attacked by a larger boat. You can fail this sequence too, which I found quite funny. I didn't on my first practice run, which was my first run of the game ever, but on this recording run, I ended up ramping out of the water over a wave and landing on top of the big boat. I don't think they wanted you to do that, and it just killed us. There was none of the Drake falling out of the boat and queuing the next sequence. It was just game over, which I thought was quite funny. But here comes the big boat in question. Be very careful with this big boat. It's going to be firing mines at you, which are incredibly pretty. They leave quite the nice green underwater glow as they land. And I believe in this sequence, all that is asked of the player is to just kind of survive for a little while, and then you will get hit and it will put you to the next sequence. I'm not too sure if there's a time limit here. A lot of the triggers in this game, because it is so spectacular all the time, it can be very difficult as a player to fully understand what's happening. Not necessarily a bad thing, but if you want to understand what's happening behind the scenes, it can definitely obfuscate a lot of situations that would have been simpler if we knew, what was really happening and where all the triggers were. Crushing difficulty is unlocked from the very beginning. It doesn't look like it is though, guys, so you have to press on it a few times. It'll be grayed out. I was really disappointed because somebody told me that it was available, and then when I clicked on it, it degraded. So it's like the developers are saying you can do it if you want to, we just recommend that you don't. And you've come to this video, I'm hoping to get help with this particular campaign, so you might be wondering, well, should I start on crushing difficulty as I shoot and practice my aim on a couple of these dudes here? I don't think it's the worst idea in the world, but it all has to do with what are you expecting from the game. Are you somebody who, on your first time, when you're not too sure where you're going, you don't know where to go, you want to take it kind of slow, learn your bearings, and then come back for challenge later? If you're that type of person, then crushing's probably not for you, because you're going to be thrown immediately into the game at the hardest it can be, and you're going to be asked to do it, rather than, stumble your way through, because one thing I can guarantee, guys, is you're not going to stumble your way through crushing. You'll stumble your way through the first half of the game, because the first 12 chapters don't have anything really challenging at all in them, and you're probably going to wonder, what is crushing all about in this particular game, because it seems very simple so far. And then chapter 13 happens, and there is a stealth section in that took me about 2 hours to do. And at the point, I didn't think I could do it, because what they ask of you for the checkpoints they present you with is so ridiculous in my personal tastes that I almost was like, yeah, I'm probably not going to make a guide for this because I don't even want to finish it. That is how averse I was to that particular sequence, and we'll talk more about that when we get there, but this is the beginning, and this is me explaining how crushing works. So we're now playing as little Nate, doing another one of these kind of interesting sequences of playing as a younger version of yourself to get used to the platforming and to get yourself back versed in doing Uncharted things, which is scaling rooftops, jumping between things, and generally having everything break at the last possible instance, and some imaginary person in front of you at all times who runs around and chalks all the ledges so you know which ones to grab. It's an interesting system, and we're in the fifth game now of Uncharted, if you count the one for the PSP that I haven't played. Speaking of that game as well, I think is it the Golden Abyss, something like that. I wonder why they haven't brought that to PlayStation 4, because PlayStation 4 at the moment has every Uncharted except for that. It would be really nice to have the full collection enabled to people who've not got a PSP so that they can check out that adventure, because apparently it's really fun. But crushing. How is crushing any different as we do some more context-sensitive stealth and listen to conversations between people that we're not going to be seeing for very long? Well, the modifiers apparently are just kind of tweaked a little bit. Everything does more damage to the player. The enemies have better equipment earlier on, more diverse equipment, so you'll see them packing weapons they wouldn't normally use. And the last boss does increase damage to the player, which I'm getting a lot of this information from a trophy guide on PlayStationTrophies.org, but I don't think a lot of it is as true as they think, because I've survived a hit from the final boss on crushing, and they say it's an instant kill, and normally it is. I don't really want to be, pedantic, but additionally, I've survived, so there are instances where that's not 100% to the letter. As for the other changes and twists, I'm not entirely sure, guys. It seemed pretty crushing to me. There is a threat indicator that you get on the other difficulties. I've never even seen it, so I don't know what that's about, but you don't get that on crushing. There is the ability to mark people. You don't get that on crushing either. And apparently, which I can't really speak too much about this because I don't know, your auto-aim is turned off on crushing. And all of this adds up to culminating in the most challenging version of the game. But that's not why the game is challenging, guys. And in the moments where it's going to be challenging, and there are about 4 that I can count, where I personally think the game gets very, very difficult. But it's challenging for bad checkpoints and bad checkpoints alone. If you can persevere, put your head down knowing that you have to play perfectly for about 30 minutes, depending on how quick you can do it personally, but you're okay with that, you will have every success in this game. Because what is asked of the player is not as steep as some of the challenges in, for instance, Uncharted 1, 2 and 3 on Brutal, where the game was very, very punishing, but the checkpoints were very good. In Uncharted 4 Crushing, the difficulty is never as strict or severe as those titles, but the checkpoints are infinitely worse, and that is where a lot of the artificial difficulty is going to come from. Just the fact that on every other difficulty, you had a moment where you knew you could replay from, and they've removed that luxury. I hate it. I think it's the laziest difficulty you can make, and coming off of The Last of Us, which did the exact same thing, it infinitely disappoints me that there's somebody out there that believes removing checkpoints is the path to good difficulty. It's not. It doesn't feel rewarding, it doesn't feel better, it does absolutely nothing except irk the player. It turns a sequence that would have been challenging and fun into just challenging for the wrong reasons, and I will never stop being a champion of the antithesis of that thought, because I just don't think it's where difficulty should be. Games are evolving in such amazing ways, and this game is no different in every other aspect except for difficulty. And that's not mentioning the biggest change to the game, which makes the game even more difficult. And we're going to be talking about this a lot because it needs to be said, guys. This game has completely redesigned the way its engine works on a mechanical level. And you might be thinking, well, it looks a little bit more pretty, it's a little bit more refined here and there, but for the most, it just feels like Uncharted to me. And in a lot of ways, that's exactly how it's meant to be. But the area where they have tweaked something is in how the cover and the interpretation of the information between your player and what you do in cover to the rest of the game world. And that's kind of a complicated way of saying that they have changed the fundamental principles of how third-person shooting works, and they've done it in a way that is pretty much the first evidence I've seen of a third-person shooter using a different paradigm for how the game functions at the most basic level. And I know all this sounds quite confusing, and you're like, well, what do you mean? In this game, as it stands, and this engine, if this was Uncharted 1, 2 and 3, and Brutal difficulty was enabled, it would be physically impossible to beat the game. It would be 100% impossible. Regardless of how good you think you are, regardless of how stubborn you think you are, it would be literally impossible because of how this world is governed. And it all comes down to how your character interacts with cover. So going into cover is the exact same as it's always been. You go up to something, he goes into cover, doesn't he? You're in cover, you can shoot from it, you can roll out of it, you can do all that fancy stuff. Nothing's changed there. However, the way enemies can interpret your hitbox is all different now. And this is something you're going to notice immediately if you played Brutal, because Brutal in those previous games taught you to play the game in a very specific way. Because cover in third-person shooters, for as long as I can remember, is inherently dishonest. And it's something that the player was able to exploit thanks to the way that the camera, thanks to the way that the hitbox, and where your damage came from on your model, all came together to enable you to go up against a piece of cover, not in cover, but up against it, hide behind a big pillar, and you could eke your way to the right of it. It was always to the right, because third-person shooters always favour the right-hand side, and you were able to fire at enemies while being 100% safe in cover, by exploiting the camera, by exploiting all those systems I just mentioned. And this was the only way to survive in Brutal, because you did not have the human ability to use cover traditionally and bob out and shoot dudes before being instantly murdered, because the computer is always going to be faster than a human on reflexes. It's just how it works. So you used this tool, and you've used it before, even if you don't realise you've used it. This is a staple of third-person shooters, and it has been for as long as I've been playing them. And it's always worked this way because of the way they're designed. The paradigm of how these systems interact with each other has always been the same. This is the first game, and there might have been others that I've forgotten in playing, that has changed that makeup. And at first I thought, well, this could be really interesting because they've taken away the ability to effectively cheese a lot of circumstances. And it was cheesy in a lot of ways because you were shooting through cover, but you were just using experience, knowledge, and the systems in front of you to give you the advantage. And there weren't many games that you needed to really use this to survive because they weren't difficult enough. But there were some that were. And then we come to Uncharted 4, where they've changed how these systems interact with each other, and the system now, instead of, if you can see somebody, you can shoot them and be relatively safe. Now, if you are aiming, regardless of how good your cover is, regardless of, even if it's physically impossible to be seen and shot, because geometry just doesn't work that way, if you can see them and you are aiming, you can be shot. It doesn't matter where you are. Trust me here, guys. I've tested this to death. You can put yourself in perfect cover, where there is not... Like, physics just doesn't work that way. There's no way anyone can hit you. You know, if you hold the left trigger to aim, and you're still physically impossible to hit, you will get shot. You will always get shot. And that's how this system works now, guys. When you're in these cover situations, when you put yourself behind a surface and you aim, your hitbox does this magical thing, and when you combine it with AI's perfect aim and highest aggression, because we're on crushing, you have this recipe of the computer has 100% advantage, even in cover. Even in instances where the player had the advantage by using these systems in a very specific way, and it's completely gone. And it fundamentally changes how you play the game. Anybody who's beaten those first 3 games on Brutal has used this mechanic the way I'm speaking of, and now it will not work. It will give the computer the same advantage, and you won't have it. And it makes just the most profound difference. And some people will never notice, some people will never see it, never have messed with it, never have even known it works that way. But for everybody who does, this is going to be the biggest adjustment of the hardest difficulty you've ever come across, because the entire game is going to put you in situations where you are not safe in cover. And I don't mean just because people rush you, and I don't mean just because every enemy now spams grenades like it's World of fucking War on Veteran. I literally mean you have no advantage in this game. You have to be almost honest. And on a hardest difficulty, that makes it very, very difficult. We're going to talk so much about this, guys. That was the beginning. This is the walkthrough. I wish you the very best with any sequences that you struggle with, and I will be here for the ones that you can't quite do. But yeah, Uncharted 4, an amazing game, and lots to talk about. Thank you very much for watching, and you take care now.